Hi, thanks very much for joining us on the latest of our Sustainable Futures career conversations. I'm here today with Jo Daley to talk about various issues relating to building a career in sustainability. So, Jo, do you just want to introduce yourself and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite. So my name's Jo Daley. I've been working in sustainability, CSR, ESG and all iterations thereof for almost 20 years now. So yeah, quite an early adopter of this area for sure.
Super. That sounds like a good place to start with sort of early career and your sort of entry point into this area of work. Do you want to just explain how you got into this sector in the first place?
Yeah, a sector that didn't really exist as a sector back then. I was one of those people who didn't know what they wanted to do and struggled to find that thing that really kind of grabbed me, that I saw myself making a career out of. And it wasn't until I went to university studying resource management, so a broad topic that covered lots of different areas, and sat in a module in year one called Sustainable Development. And that was it. That was the light bulb moment where I suddenly thought, okay, this makes sense to me now. This is what I'm here to do, and so it went from there really.
Yes, and so. How easy did you find that first job? Because often in sustainability, it's the first job, that first move into the world of work that's the most difficult one to achieve. Yeah. How did you do that?
And again, there weren't sustainability specific jobs, were there, at that time? So I was lucky enough to be offered an opportunity to train as a surveyor with a small construction company who were quite environmentally minded and wanted to explore and understand their environmental impact in a way that a lot weren't necessarily focusing on back then. So I had an opportunity to develop quite technical skills that actually have kind of stood me in really good stead throughout my career, if I'm honest, from an operational perspective, but actually to really start to explore the environmental impact of a construction industry, albeit on a very small scale at that stage.
But then you decided, presumably, that sort of relatively narrow definition of the environmental side wasn't necessarily right. Where did you take it from there?
So I was offered a job, and this is what I love about sustainability, the number of job titles that you can be given that in some way still relate to sustainability. So they attach them to other things, don't they? It's, health, safety and environment was a very common one for quite a while. So I was offered an opportunity to be an environment and training manager for a hotel, quite a big resort hotel, which, very much kind of crossed multiple skill sets, but allowed me to explore not just the operational environmental side of obviously looking at the impact of the overall resort, but actually starting to explore some of the, if you like, the S side of things. So looking at some pieces around working with the staff within the business, so starting to explore some of those pieces. Gender equality was a big thing for the general manager at the time, which was not something, again, that was necessarily spoken about. So there were lots of different elements that then started to broaden that, and even down to creating programs for visitors to the hotel to be able to explore the fantastic 600 odd acres of grounds. So we set up bat tours and wildlife tours and nature tours. So again, it was kind of starting to really understand, I think, the wider scope of what sustainability or what we now recognise sustainability as today.
Yes, and lots of interesting skills about dealing with people as well, which come into that sustainability space as well, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's always the challenge, isn't it? Is the management of stakeholders within that, and as a early stage career, and in an area that was still very much in its infancy, a lot of time educating, a lot of time securing buy-in, a lot of time finding the right levers and drivers in order to communicate with people and get them to kind of come along on the journey of whatever it was you were trying to achieve. Yes.
So the next move for you was using those skills and evolving them in a different sector.
Yes. So I at that point decided I was made redundant from that role. alongside various changes that were going on in the business. But the wider hotel group that hotel sat within, we'd taken that hotel from number 38 from a green environmental assessment perspective to number 1 in the portfolio in the space of a year. So I decided to set up my own consultancy and offer the wider hotel group an opportunity to benefit from the same kind of approach, and so worked for them for a while, and at that time of life with children, which I always think is very much a juggle that, you know, particularly women, although less so now and more so across both kind of partnerships and primary carers, being able to manage and juggle projects and work alongside childcare. So that consultancy I ran for about 10 years. And was able to look for projects and opportunities that expanded skill sets and worked across many different sectors. Yes. So third sector, definitely some work in third sector, which was really interesting, looking at land trusts and tenanted farmers, right through to private schools, through to retail, and everything in between. Yeah.
A fascinating time. And in terms of those skills of a consultant, do you feel that they're sort of additional elements of what you've brought subsequently as well?
Yeah, and I think being a consultant offers some great opportunities to have lots of foots in lots of camps, but at the same time, you know, it's always, isn't it, the consultant versus in-house. When you're in-house, you're really hands-on, you have ownership, accountability, you can really drive and deliver impact over a period of time that you can measure and you can point to. Consultants, I think, you know, you're sitting at that maybe more slightly superficial level where you're able to impact a multitude of different businesses, but not necessarily to the same level and degree. So I think it's always trade-offs and balances. But in terms of skill sets of engaging with stakeholders, of educating, which I describe probably my entire career as about 80% education is what it feels like, because that's the role of an SME, is to bring that knowledge to those stakeholders and make sure that they understand, engage, and get the buy-in to. And
having sufficient knowledge about such a broad range of topics, and again, that's one of the other challenges, isn't it, within a sustainability remit in whatever form, is having that understanding of such a broad range of topics.
It is. I mean, sustainability, or ESG as we now talk about it increasingly, really covers everything. To be perfectly honest, if you want to look at it through whichever lens, there's not very much that sits outside of the remit and scope of that. And I think that's an interesting piece in sustainability professions, increasingly seeing specialisms within that wide scope, and actually an opportunity for people to start focusing specifically on key areas within that space that they're interested in, as opposed to being more of a generalist and sitting across all three areas of ESG.
Yes, yeah. And just going back to the career, that I think was the point at which you then moved internationally, wasn't it? Was that over to Canada? So yeah. You got a really interesting role out in British Columbia, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Very fortunate. Yes, got offered an opportunity. My husband got offered an opportunity to go and work on Vancouver Island. We took about 3 seconds to make that decision about whether that was right for us as a family. I'm not sure who turns that down. No. So emigrated unseen, and I was very fortunate to land a role as lead of CSR for a ferry company out in British Columbia. So again, some really interesting, kind of very broad spectrum approaches to sustainability and the wider piece of sustainability. And
I was interested in picking up that sort of shift from more of an environmentally focused to a more CSR focused. How did you find that? Was it very different, or was it all part of the same sort of remit in effect?
I think it's all part of the same remit, but the focus was definitely much more from what I would consider CSR. And I think there's degrees with all of this and nuance within the difference between sustainability, CSR, and ESG probably has a slightly clearer remit maybe. They had, because it was a ferry company, obviously a huge amount of environmental considerations from a marine perspective that were managed by an in-house environmental team who were specifically focused on the delivery and compliance of that side. So it enabled me to focus much more on the communities. So the ferry company supports 40 odd communities right the way up the coast. It's a lifeline provision service, so it's very important to be part of those communities. First Nations peoples in those communities who obviously have a huge focus and huge focal point for anything that we were trying to develop, any of the projects we were looking to develop, and very much about engaging with those communities and looking at how we could educate within, a transient population. You have a lot of travellers, obviously a lot of tourists. Yes. So actually, how can you take those opportunities, those touch points, whilst they're with you on a ferry for an hour and a half, and provide some form of education, some form of knowledge, some form of engagement around, the phenomenal wildlife and environment, broader environment of British Columbia, and also an opportunity, to educate within that.
And it sounds like that was one of the purposes of the business. It was quite involved in that and committed to that. Do you think that was to do with the culture of the country, or is just the business, or how's the sort of where does that emphasis on sustainability come from, do you think? I
think being very aware, they were and are very aware of the fact that they're operating in some of the most pristine wilderness in the world, and the responsibility to protect that and to manage that is very much inherent within the business, and to work with the communities and the populations in those areas, some of whom are very remote. I think that sense of responsibility was very much front and centre for the business.
Yes. So, and I was just interested about that. That's the business, the sort of differences of culture between Canada in that instance, international businesses more broadly. Is there a lot of similarities? I suppose the better question is, where are the similarities and where are the differences?
Yeah, well, the role after that was back in the UK, but for an international business. So that was working for a $7.5 billion real estate portfolio across 10 countries across Europe with 26 locations. So very, very complicated, very, very difficult business to operate ESG within a lot of stakeholders to bring into that conversation. And I think culturally working across 10 countries with very, very distinct perspectives and opinions on sustainability was a really interesting and challenging role, because you're looking at having comprehensive approach to what you're trying to achieve ultimately and what you're trying to drive forward for the business, but that has to allow for flexibility and nuance of where each of those individual countries are at on that journey. So it's creating that flexibility within a framework that allows me to deliver at a kind of comprehensive whole business perspective, whilst allowing for that room internally for them to come along on the journey at their own pace.
And how much of it is sort of pushing somebody, and how much of it is facilitating that move? I suppose that depends on the company, doesn't it? But
it does, and I think I think the business was a matrixed organisation. It was very, very complicated investor group, which played into quite significantly into what you're able to achieve and what you're targeting in different areas. There's definitely some push. I think anybody who works in sustainability would tell you, you have to be an advocate, you have to be the person who is driving, you have to be aspirational and ambitious on behalf of the business that you're working for, but it has to be pragmatic. Yeah. It has to be fit for purpose. It has to deliver against the needs of investor groups, the needs of cultural variances within a business. Yeah. And it's a challenge, because you always want it to move faster than it will do, and you always want it to be complete and total in the way it moves forward. And actually, I think it's accepting that all progress is good progress, I think is the phrase for that kind of business. Yeah. Every step forward is a step forward.
Yes. And that brings us to the current role and what you're doing now, which is closer to that finance and side of things, which is a really interesting area. And that whole topic of ESG that you've mentioned already is something I'm really keen to pick up with you, and particularly the positive impact that can have, and those finance conversations can have on the wider ESG and sustainability. So just explain where you are at the moment and what that role entails, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company called Clearwater International. I'm Director, Head of Impact. Great title, like being Head of Impact. It's a corporate finance business working obviously within M&A, 17 offices across 9 countries, I believe, across Europe. And I think for my entire career, the conversations that I've always had have been, until the finance industry moves, this is only ever going to be periphery. This is only ever going to be adoption for those who are, advocates and who are engaged with the topic. I think for it to become fully integrated into and driven into all businesses at all levels, it had to come from the money. The money drives everything. So I think the finance industry and the changes that we've seen in the finance industry over the last 5 or so years, with a move to understanding and integrating ESG into the investment community in particular, has really shifted now that rate of adoption. I think COVID was a huge catalyst for that. I think it brought to light some significant risks. And of course, finance industry world works very much in risk. It's risk management and risk mitigation. So if there's a perceived risk, it therefore becomes a lever and a driver of change, which is what we've seen.
Yes. So talk a little bit about when you get involved in that process then, and how that impact manifests itself.
So we work within the mid-market sector. We work for entrepreneurs, founders, owner-managed businesses, as well as obviously very much within the private equity community. I built an ESG health check for the business, which assesses against 38 KPIs and looks at, very much from a materiality perspective, looks at the level of maturity within a business, within a client that we're mandated on supporting, and the role is very much about maximising valuation prior to transaction. We know that ESG is a driver of value. Increasingly, we have data that demonstrates that. It's the holy grail, it's the unicorn, is that methodology that demonstrates that link between advanced ESG and driving higher valuations. We're seeing a much more competitive marketplace for businesses that have integrated and advanced ESG. So for me, it's about how can I support our clients in ensuring that they're well positioned to go to market to capitalise on that. Usually they've done more work than they think they have. You start talking to some of the smaller businesses within the mid-market sector, and they feel like ESG is something they're aware of, but they haven't necessarily started on that journey. But you start asking questions about how they support their staff and how they mitigate risk in their supply chain, and usually you uncover more work than they think. So for us, it's about them being able to position that to the marketplace and demonstrate the value associated with that.
I'm interested, there's been talk recently about ESG fatigue and sort of just starting to I suppose the process of becoming mainstream. I'm just reading into what you're saying, that it's the data that is the key element of pushing beyond that, of recognising that actually there is some benefit and value in that ESG process over and above doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think, data is king. Data for anything to do with ESG or sustainability is the driver of everything. And having good data that you have kind of confidence in and that stands up with integrity is a really important part of the process. I think it's about making sure that it's material to the business. I think that's how you prevent that engagement fatigue piece that's coming with ESG, is that actually it's about focusing and prioritising and understanding what's most materially important for and relevant for the business and for the stakeholders associated with that business. So actually the approach that we have is different than if they were bringing in a sustainability consultant to look at their business, because that tends to be very, very wide and broad. We're looking at actually where are the key risks here? Where are the key value creation opportunities? I think that's what we're seeing a shift of as the maturity of ESG within the finance industry continues. It is starting to move away from purely risk-based, and it is starting to look at actually through mitigating these risks, there are fantastic value creation opportunities. So I think it's about shifting that focus away from, it's carrot and stick, isn't it? It's the same as anything. So you get that fatigue comes when everybody's being beaten constantly by you should be doing this and you should be doing that and you must be doing this. But actually, if you can present it to businesses and to the marketplace that actually, by having a strong and an integrated ESG strategy, actually you're able to access public sector contracts that previously you wouldn't have necessarily been able to fulfill the procurement requirements associated with that. You've got new marketplaces you can explore. There's multiple different ways that we can explore that for and with clients.
And I'm interested, presumably that's where you see the expertise of a sustainability professional is interpreting all of the different things that are going on out there and identifying the value that can bring to a particular organisation. To do that, what skills do you think somebody needs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my passion is around having a strategic approach. And I think that's something that people who are entering the ESG space within businesses where it's still off the side of their desk. Somebody's expressed an interest and they're like, you're our new go-to ESG person. I think that's the piece that actually needs to be understood better to become a professional within the space, is to understand that if you're looking at these things strategically, you're able actually to understand much better where those opportunities lie, where the value creation is. You're looking at it from a material perspective. I think it's very easy to get pulled down into the detail with ESG, and I think it's important that there are people who have the right level of expertise, who are working on carbon footprint baselining for a business, etc. But I think actually being able to step back and take a strategic view of the business is where you're able to identify those opportunities.
Okay, that's interesting. So in that interpretation, too much technical is counterproductive in the bigger, broader sense, would you say?
I think you need all of the skills, don't you? And of course, I'm going to say we need all of those skill sets because they're all important. We're working in mid-market businesses. They're not going to have internal resource necessarily allocated to a professional or an expertise. And the conversation I always have is it's about bringing expertise in at the right moment for the right scope of piece of work. So having somebody come in who's going to help you baseline your carbon footprint is an expert process. That's not usually something that can be done internally. Having someone come in and help you work on a strategy, on integrating that strategy within the business strategy. It's not an ESG strategy and a business strategy. It's actually, that's what we're looking to achieve, so that you've got visibility then on what your implementation roadmap of the next 2 years looks like. And actually then being able to step back and say a lot of that work now can be done by the business. It doesn't necessarily, they're experts in their business, they're experts in their people, they're experts in their suppliers. If we've built and given them all of the pieces they need, then they don't need that expertise on a constant basis. So I think it's knowing when those right moments are for bringing in that external help.
So it's that more strategic view that you've been proposing. So just sort of taking that, and we're sort of bringing things to a bit of a close now. I'm interested in snippets of advice that you would give to somebody who's looking at the sustainability space, sees the opportunities that probably weren't there when you were developing the career, but you're now in a position where you can maybe look at it in the round and say, okay, these are the skills that have allowed you to be able to develop the fascinating career with the international experience and all of the different things that's entailed. Are there any pearls of wisdom that you'd pass on?
Well, I think my route into sustainability is ancient history, isn't it, now, because it didn't exist at the time. And so now it is a recognised profession. And I think, having an academic understanding, there are a multitude of different sustainability-related courses out there at university now, is really great foundation. Yeah. But I think the experience and the expertise comes from having a multifaceted approach to how you deploy that knowledge and that academic understanding. It's the practicalities of using that academic knowledge and then having a pragmatic approach. Yes. I think I meet a lot of young people coming into the space now who are true believers who fundamentally believe in all aspects of climate change, the fundamental imperative that we all face now of a climate emergency, and that they really want to be part of the solution. They want to be part of the change, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I think the reality on the ground level and having a pragmatic approach of how you go about actioning that change and being part of that change is probably a challenging piece for some to learn.
It is interesting, isn't it? 'Cause you need both. You need that enthusiasm, you need that drive, but you also need the understanding about how pragmatically businesses work and what levers to pull in order to actually make the changes that everybody wants.
Yeah, I think it's know your stakeholders. I think it's know and understand what their drivers are, and then you can position sustainability as a win with a multitude of different drivers. We know that sustainability is a good thing for a business to do. There's very, very little downside. But if you're talking to a CFO, they want to understand what the cost implications are going to be on their CapEx budget for the next 2 years and how that's going to impact their future plans for growth within the business or a refinance that's coming up. So actually using that and understanding how to position to the right audience is a really key important piece. I think you do have to be passionate. Yes. You do have to, because there are still less than when I started, but there are still brick walls that you come up against. There is still skepticism, particularly in the business community. So I think you have to be passionate. You have to have resilience, and you have to, ultimately be a really good communicator to be able to position what you're trying to communicate to each individual stakeholder.
Yeah. There are lots there we could pick up as well, but we've sadly come to the end of the time. Jo, that's been fascinating. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed that as well. I certainly have. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for listening and watching.